2, 3. Test 1, 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 2, 3. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3.
Good. Ja? Ja, det tror jeg. I hope. Is it working?
Sorry, say something.
Hi? Does it? No sound?
I can't remember which one it is.
Okay. So, better?
Higher?
Now it works?
Do you want it higher?
No, if it's understandable, is it? Okay, or we make it a bit louder, yeah. So, better? Good. So then, hello everybody and good morning also at home. I would like to introduce you to the TEMO challenge today. and give you a short briefing about what you can expect and what we expect from you during the rest of the semester. My name is Katrin Kirchner. I'm associate professor here at DTU Management, and I'm working together with Casper and Christine. What is the plan for today? First, we start with the challenge briefing. So I will give you an overview about what we will do in this challenge, and also it is about the report writing and the feedback. Then we will have a short break, and after the break we start with the presentation of the challenge. We will have a presentation from Danfoss today, and we will have two presenters. One is Thomas Kolster, the head of service innovation, and we have also Bjarke Osmundsen here as the head of analytics and insights. They will present a challenge from their company today, and after the break, another break, you have the chance to ask the first questions to the two, and that's for today. So, but the first, let's say 40 minutes, we will talk about your project work and how it will be organized. So let's first start a bit what we expect at the end of this challenge, which will be a report, a group written report. And this report is supposed to be 20 pages, and 20 pages is everything. That means including a title page and all the appendixes or whatever you else would like to write. So these are the 20 pages, and that it is also clear, of course, what means 20 pages. You can use the size 5, of course, which would be a bit unreadable. That's why we have set up here some rules about the size of the page, which is the top and bottom margin and left and right margin, which I would say is a typical thing. And also how big should be the letters. So you can write your report in Word or LaTeX, whatever you like. It doesn't matter. You find the presentation also uploaded on Insight, so it's not needed that you write down all the tiny details, of course. So that is what we would like to have from you, from your group at the end of the semester. And as you know, there is only the report that counts for the final grade. Of course, you are not alone writing your report, so because you will have assistance during the challenge. So first, of course, you have your TAs that will support you in writing this report, as they also helped you in the previous case studies that you did together with them. And we suggest that you have, every group has at least 2 meetings with the TAs. Also, it's not mandatory, so it is also, of course, how far you came and how many questions you have. So you are responsible then to schedule meetings with your TAs. Also, it's always nice to have a lot of time with the TAs. We would like to give every group to have the chance to talk to his TA, so it's not possible to have 2 meetings, one after the other directly, so that that also the other groups have time to ask questions to the TAs. Nevertheless, the TAs can give you great feedback, but they do not do the grading at the end of the semester, so they do not have any influence on the final evaluation of your report, because the grading is done by the teachers. Additionally, we offer you a feedback session. This feedback session will be in exactly 2 weeks on the 11th of November. Due to the special situation, because of Corona, this feedback session will be done only online, so there will be no class here in the room for that. So the idea is that during the feedback session, which is planned from 9:30 to 12 on the 11th of November, you will have the opportunity to get feedback for your solution or for the first solution ideas from the teachers, but also from the company guests. So they will also come again online and answer questions and give you feedback to the results that you have till now. So it is not mandatory. Of course, you do not need to present something or to have a solution ready in 2 weeks. So, but it is of course recommended that you take the advantage to be present online and to ask questions because that gives you also then some feedback and it helps you to improve your solution or to at least get the feedback whether you are on the right pathway or whether you miss something. So how the feedback session is planned, so that you have the opportunity to show what you did in the 2 weeks time. You can prepare one slide where you present short, of course can only be short, the analysis, a solution, and also you can put there one question to Danfoss. Because we have quite a number of groups, it is unfortunately not possible to have a lot of slides, so we have to stick to one slide so that we give as many groups as possible the opportunity to get the feedback. So in order that we have time to get an overview about all your questions and all your solutions, you can submit the slides on the Monday before, which is the 9th of November till 12 noon. We will open then the opportunity on Insight that you can upload your slides there. The feedback session will then be on the 11th of November starting at 9:30 and there will be a Zoom link sent around so that you can all participate online. So the idea is that we put all the slides together and we will go together to as many slides as possible. We have 2.5 hours for that. So, but let's imagine that all of you have sent a slide. It is a bit tricky, but we will give our best to go to as many slides as possible for this feedback session. If the group is present and someone wants to say something, then you can shortly comment on the slide. So in order to avoid that we go one way and back with screen sharing, we put all the slides together. So when you see your slide and you are present, you can give some comments to that. And then we will give the word to Danfoss to give you feedback. And we can also, we as a teachers will be also there and we will give you feedback on what you presented. We will also record the session because I think even if it's not your slide that is shown, it might be useful to hear what other groups did and what was the feedback or what was the answer to the question. Then you have again a bit of time to work further on your reports. So, and the final report submission is on the 2nd of December, which is 2 weeks later, before noon. And you can also upload your solution then again on DTU Insight. It can be done as a PDF file, but you can also send a Word file or the LaTeX. So in order that we at the end know who is who, because we have to distribute the reports to different lecturers, then the title of the document should include that you have the Danfoss case, what was your TEMO class, and what was the group name, so that we can easily distribute it. Important is because we have this year only the group report that you mark clearly on the title page who did what on the report, so that we can also have the chance to give you individual grade. I will come back to that, how it should be done in a minute. So now the report sounds a big thing, so that's why we give you some guidelines about how the report should look like. As I already said, we have altogether 20 pages to write. So the first page is the front page, where there's, of course, that's a title page where you put your names and also who wrote what in the report. The second page is the table of content to have an overview about what will come in the report. And then the remaining report consists of 4 different parts. And we put here also what is the approximate number of pages that you should write there. The first part will be that you describe the present situation of the company. You will get information about this today, but of course you can also look up more material in the web. Which is what is actually the key problem and who owns this problem. And we expect there like 2 to 3 pages to write. The second part is then to find out actually where the problem comes from, the causal explanations, and that should be done in the second part, which we call the retrospective analysis. As you also are supposed to do this with the help of the models that you learned in the class, we expect that this will take like 5 to 7 pages. Yeah, but because we only not analyze the problem, but we also want to find a solution. That will be the third part then, which is called prospective analysis, which is will deal with your proposals and also what you suggest that the company should do to solve their problem, and this should be like 6 to 8 pages. And the last part is then the summing up, so there's the conclusion and the final recommendation that you give. Maybe you have several solutions that you say they would be possible, but you have one that you would prioritize because of some reasons. And this can take like 3 to 4 pages. So let's then go to all these parts of the report in more detail. The first part is, as I said, the front page for the report. And as, of course, the company has a name, our case has a name, this could be there on the front page. Then, of course, in which class you have been, so who were your TAs. Then you already selected a name for your team. And then we have the student numbers of all team members. We don't need the name, so the student numbers are fully enough. And all of you should sign on this front page. And we need there also an overview of individual contributions. How this could look like, this is an example of a typical front page. So we have here the name of a company. It's not Danfoss, but something else. And there's even a subtitle. We have the name of the group here. And then we see, you see here all the authors that contributed to this report. And you see also to which section they contributed. And in order to be sure that it is was really like this, then here should come the signature. And you also see here that in order to identify your class, you just put your teaching assistant names here. So it is very important for us that you write there that who did what and that everyone agrees on that, so that we can really have or see what you individually contributed to the report, because sometimes it happens. It can happen, of course, you are a group where you all equally contributed. It can also be that there was maybe one that did not contribute so much, and then, of course, maybe you find it then unfair that everyone receives the same grade, or there's just one part that is not so well written. So here we can take the chance for an individual grading. So how we can do this, how you can say who did what. So one way is, which we call here the model A, that you specify, for instance, which pages you wrote. So that could be a way to say so who actually, which students wrote exactly which pages, in case this is possible, of course, to do. Another thing would be also to say, okay, you write down which parts of the report, which are some sections you wrote. So maybe that is just something invented here. Some student worked on the data collection, another one searched for further information, and the third one did analysis. It could be also that you use the section numbers or the names of the sections so that it is clear who did what. So, that was how the title page looks like. Now we have to go a bit in depth about what should be exactly in the report. Maybe first about what is the aim of the game at all. So the idea is that you use the models and theories that you heard in the lecture till now, and you apply it on a real-world business problem. So you will hear the problem that Danfoss faces currently, and you are supposed to analyze this problem with the models that you know already. So it's not just one theory or one model that will fit here, but there's for sure a combination of them so that you can analyze the problem from different perspectives and also find a solution using these models again. So we want that you analyze the problem, you find the causes of the problem. So the problem is maybe halfway easy to identify, but it's also the question why the problem is there, because that will give you a hint on how you can find a solution to this problem, because you address the causes of the problem. So that means also that there should be a current way of writing that, of course, you identify the problem, you find out why you have the problem, and the solution, of course, should answer to this problem and should address this, and the solution should fit to the problem that you identified. So then we have the first part of the report. As I already mentioned, this should describe the present situation of the company. So what we want here that you do is you can do a short description of the company. So what is the company doing principally? And also what is the key problem, or maybe there are also key problems that you would like that have to be addressed here. So there are some questions here that you could answer with in this first part of the report. So how you would characterize the company, so what type of company do you have? What is the key problem? So it is and how, so maybe it's implicitly only given, so it is then necessary to identify what is the problem and what is the consequence of this situation. So we have a certain problem that you identify, and this maybe causes something in the company, maybe that the company loses customers, or they have a problem to sell products, or they cannot develop a certain product, whatever it is. You have a problem that might have other consequences for the company. This situation that the company is facing currently can then impact the different organizational levels. So it can be a problem on the tactical level, it can be also on the strategic level. And therefore there might be also a specific problem owner that you can identify. It can be the top manager, it can be also on lower levels and so on. So how you can describe the current situation of the company. Here you can use models and theories that you learned in the class and that help you to understand the strategy of the company or the organizational design, so how the company is set up. This can also play a role for the analysis later, or what is the business model. So these are all models that you learned, and they can help you to describe what the company is doing. That's why it is good for the presentation of the challenge later, that you already have all your models in mind and think about, do you get all the necessary information from the company regarding this? Do they talk about the organizational structure? Do you get information from the presentation about the business model of the company and so on? When we have the current situation ready, then we come to the key problem. So what is actually the problem that the company currently faces? As I mentioned, it can be explicitly mentioned, maybe it's also implicitly, so you need to do a little analysis to figure out, okay, what is actually the key problem behind all the presentation that you will hear. And we have also the key problem owner that is responsible also or has to address this problem. And the key problem owner is usually the actor that has the power and the competences to solve the problem. So is it a problem, on which level of the organization you have the problem, and this gives you also a hint on who might be the key problem owner, who can solve this problem in the future. So here, this, just to remind you, are these 3 levels in the organization. We have an operational level, which is more the daily business. We have the tactical level, the short-term perspective, or we have the strategic level, the long-term perspective and strategies. And depending on where your problem is sitting, on which level, you might have different key problem owners that are responsible for that problem. So after you identified the current situation and the key problem and key problem owner, then we come to the second part, which is the retrospective analysis. And here we would like that you go in depth to analyze this problem and find the root causes. So you can start with the organizational level that you identified before, where the problem sits and where the problem owner sits. Then you can argue, of course, why it is important that you start at this level of the company and you try to analyze the problem. So why you have actually this problem, what might be the reasons here. Also here you can use models and theories from the course. For instance, there might be an issue when you have a deeper look on the business model. There might be a problem that you can explain the problem with looking deeper into the STAR model and so on. And then in this analysis, you should outline all the causes and actors. So who is responsible maybe here, who is involved in this problem. You should analyze opportunities and threats and strengths and weaknesses in the SWOT model and so on, so that it is clear where your problem comes from in depth, what are the causes of the problem, and this gives you also hints, of course, for the next part to see how you can address the problem and solve it. So in this causal analysis, then you can ask yourself in the group, so what kind of insights do you need? So how you can understand the problem better, which models and theories you can use here. It's good to go to all the theories and models you learned in the class to make a decision about, do you need this here? Do you have enough data for this? Also, because you have the chance to ask 2 weeks later Danfoss again, in case you are there's any information that you are missing. So the question is then how you can relate and combine all the information that you get from the talk, but also from additional information that you might find in the web, so that you can fill in all the information for the models and theories that you know, and then to come up with what caused this problem. So after this is really clear, then we can go to the third part, which is the prospective analysis. And here the idea is that you propose solutions to this key problem, or maybe there are 2 key problems. And of course, this should be very much related to the previous part of the report. So the solutions should not fall from the sky, but of course, they should be related to what you wrote before. So they should fit really to the problem. That sounds logical, but it's not always the case that we have a report where, because you can get a lot of cool ideas and maybe they are cool, but they do not solve the issue that the company is currently facing. And it's also interesting to look, of course, on the implementation aspects of your solution. So maybe you have a cool idea, but yeah, the idea cannot be implemented, or how this idea could be implemented. Or maybe you say then, okay, that would be something for the future. It sounds cool, but it is not something that the company can do right now, because maybe they miss something important that is needed. So important is here for a good report that you have a coherence between the key problem that you identified and the causes, why we have this problem, and also the solution, so that all of that fits together. So it is very important that you can also have alternative proposals for the solution, because you are a team and everyone has maybe another idea what you can do. But there might be some solutions that you found that fit better to the key problem, and others maybe fit less well. So, but it is nice to list them and then argue for how which solution should be maybe implemented first, and how it could be implemented, and which solutions might be implemented later or just kept in mind. Also here, of course, you can use the models and theories that you learned in the class, so that you can support your proposal. So when you have, for instance, the star model, and you identified in the previous part that there's a misalignment of some parts of the star model, and then you come up with the solution, you can, of course, then argue, okay, if now we have a changed star model, and it is this and this, and it solves this and this problems that you identified further, or you identified a problem in the business model with the business model canvas, and also here you can argue then, okay, my solution, our solution that we find here, that would change the business model here and here, and therefore it would contribute to solve this problem. So for this solution proposal part, then the question is again, so what kind of insight do you need for that, and which models, think on that, which models can help you to find a solution, and to explain also the changes for the company, and how you can relate all the data and information that you get from the case, but also from additional information to fill in all the different parts of the models and theories. This model you also saw in the class before, so we have the internal and the external forces here, and they should be in balance, they should be aligned. So you should look on, of course, as well as the internal influence, but also on the external influence. So which routines you have, which things need to be changed in the company internally, and how this is also influencing then the external forces here. And then we come to the last part, which is the conclusions and recommendations. So now you did a long journey of in your reports, you analyzed, you identified the problem, you analyzed it deeper, you find a number of solutions, and now we have, of course, to come to the conclusion. So what you would actually recommend the company to do based on everything what you figured out till now. So you present your recommendations clearly for the company, what the company should do. And also these should be, of course, based on the previous parts of the report. So what the company should really do, and which actors might be involved here, and how your recommendations contribute to solve the problem, to solve the challenge the company is really facing, and how this contributes to a competitive advantage for the company. You also can a bit reflect on how your solution can be actually implemented in the company. so that it's not just theoretically, but also can be really used later. And also how this solution will influence all the parts of the company. So it might be on the strategic level, there might be changes on the tactical level, but also on the operational level. So of course, you are not working for Danfoss, you are not inside this company, and you also don't know, of course, how the market will develop or how competitors will behave in the future. But of course, you need to assume something so that you can say, okay, we assume the following things. So, and our report will be based on it. So you can, at the beginning of your report, place some assumptions that should be valid for your report. And then you can at the end check, okay, what would happen actually if, because you assumed this, when these assumptions are not true at the end. So how will this influence? So for instance, you assume that there is no competitor, for instance, just in case that was the problem. And then you assume this for the whole solution, but it might be that there is somehow coming a competitor. So what now? Is your solution still valid? Or what the company would need to adapt that they can still use your solution. Or maybe they cannot use your solution in case some assumption that you used during your report is not valid. So before we come to the questions from your side, I can give you maybe some final recommendations. So this, of course, this session will be recorded, so you have the chance to listen to it later. But it's also very important that you already now listen carefully when Danfoss is coming soon, and that you listen to them, that you make notes, so that you can afterwards directly ask questions for them. That is your opportunity to get insights from the company. So ask all your questions that you might have, so that you can get as many information as possible about your case that you can use. What is also very good is that you, if you maybe you are together already in teams, maybe that you are looking on different models already. So do you get all the information? Maybe one of you looks at the business model. Do you get all information for the business model? Do you get all information that you could draw a star model now? Can you do a SWOT analysis? Do you get some information from that? So have all the models in mind and think about, okay, do I get all the information already, or do I need to ask something to Danfoss later? That's your opportunity. So if you have the models in front of you, it might help you a lot to see whether you have everything that is necessary. Look at also what is the company actually doing and what value they provide and to whom they provide this value. And what pains might the customers have that they would like to address. So that can be an internal customer, of course, so someone internally in the company who has a problem here. It might be also the consumer, the external customer that has a problem here. And how the company is also organized could be interesting, because also maybe here there is some issue that you could address or that you need to figure out who is the key problem owner. So these are some of the questions you might want to concentrate on during the presentation of Danfoss. Afterwards you have the chance to ask, and then we see you again. You see the TAs, of course, in between, but we see you again then in the feedback session on the 11th of November. So that was it from our side regarding how this challenge will be organized and also how to write the report. As I said, you find this presentation also on Insight to read all the details again. And now we are open for questions. Yeah? Yeah, the question was, can be several students responsible for the same sections? That is possible, and then you write it just on the title page. Yeah. Yep.
To what extent would you recommend using example for implementation that we produce theory for change management.
So there is, so the question is it or would we recommend to use other models? It is of course possible to use also other models. It is important that you then mention that you not say, okay, this is the model result, but also like why you use this model and what this model tells you. I mean, especially also for change management, this was also covered in the course a bit. So that might be also covered by some of the models that we have, but it's of course possible to use also models that were not taught exactly in this class. But then explain a bit why you use it here and why you find it's recommended to apply it here. Yeah. More questions? Yeah? Yes, everything is included in the 20 pages, yeah. So any questions from the auditorium at home, Christina? Can you see something? No? Oh, okay, that's another question. They can then later watch the video. Any more questions from your side for now? Yep.
Are we expected to find data ourselves, or should we just be provided with everything from Danfoss?
It's possible. I mean, when you do the analysis and then you see, I think I don't have enough information for this, then it's of course possible to go also to the web, for instance, and find additional information. It's easy. Several things are, of course, also on the Danfoss website or on some reports about the company. And you can include all this information if you think they are necessary to explain a bit more what is the for instance, the problem and why they have maybe this problem, because you find some interesting newspaper articles and so on. But then it would be good to put also the source where you found this. So, last chance to ask questions. Then we have a... Yeah? Okay, can you read them?
No, I don't have the chat here. Could you just read them out loud? I have inside the messenger only.
Okay. No. So the slide submission for the 11th of November is just for the feedback session. And because it's always easier to have something visual in front of you when you say, okay, we for instance did the business model and we have a concrete question here, or we miss some information there, or we have some solution. So that is only to get the feedback during the feedback session. The slide will not be graded, and it's not mandatory that every group submits a slide. It is just an opportunity for getting a feedback, or maybe the week before you have an important question that you say, I need some more input from Danfoss, or we have a solution we are not really sure about. We would like to get a short feedback from the teacher whether we are on the right path. It's not included in the grading. The only thing that counts is the report. So do we have more questions?
To what extent can or should we external sources use? Or do we recommend to stick to the information in the Danfoss presentation, or maybe have our own sources?
So the question is, should you rely only on the Danfoss information, or is it recommended also to use additional information? I would say it depends, of course, how much the Danfoss information is giving to you, but if something is unclear to you, or you need some more information, then it is recommended also to go to the web, to go to the Danfoss website and to get some more information there. Of course, you can ask also Danfoss, but some information might be, let's say, easy to find. let's say, maybe, for instance, about the organizational structure or about their customers or whatever, and you can use this information also in the report, and then just put where you found this information as one of the sources.
There is a question from Moritz.
Hmm?
How much theory should there be explaining the models?
So the question is, how much theory should be there to explain the models? What we would like to know is why, what is this model generally doing? That can be said in one sentence, and why you want to apply it here. So that it's not like, okay, we take all the models out that we ever had in the class, and then we boom, 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 boom. But that we have, of course, also, okay, that's the business model, canvas. With that, we can analyze, and that we use it because, and then also give, if there's anything interesting what you see in the business model, it should be also described then in the text. So not just having pictures, 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 and then the lecturer has to find himself or herself what you wanted to say with this.
The 20 pages, is that determined by a number of words or?
Okay, the 20 pages is what is determined, what means the 20 pages, and why is it now not visible anymore? So the 20 pages is determined by this. We defined how big is it. So we have 2 centimeters top and bottom margin. We have left and right 3 centimeters. And then we have times New Roman size 12 and 1.5 line space, and that determines a page. And of course, if you have pictures in there, then so it is not determined by the number of words, but by the number of really pages. So the more pictures, of course, the more space it takes.
Okay. Does everything need to be in the report, or can there be an appendix?
There can be an appendix, but it unfortunately counts for the 20 pages, so it's not giving you more space if you use an appendix.
Do we just put the models in the report? They seem to take so much space.
Yeah, the models, of course, they take much space, and we saw also in the previous years that there are some cool ways in making it smaller, but yes, they take, of course, space, unfortunately.
And then there is this question about the number of pages, how it's determined. Is it the words or how it is defined? But again,
Yeah, so the
is how much we can.
yes, is how much you can fit on these 20 pages, and so that are the restrictions for the size, and we also had a recommendation of what is on every, so how much space you should use approx for every of the parts. There's another question. Yeah, it's the reference list is also then included in this, yes. But it can be also at the end, so if you don't spend the whole page for the conclusion or so, then you can also, or do you need always to put it on an extra page?
No. It's just included in the 20 pages.
It's all included, yeah? Hmm? Yeah, that is that is a good question. Yeah, so why you are punished? Because you need the table of content and the front page and so on. But unfortunately, we have I think we need to restrict it because there's always something tempting to say more or less. I agree. Yes. Do we have to turn on yet?
Is it on? Can you turn on this mic? Yeah, it's not even on here. It's just a sec.
Does it work now? Yes, it works. So the question is about these references and the front page. We have decided, we've used this now for 15 years, that we go with the 20 pages. It has worked very nicely always, and it's possible both to make a nice front page and table of content and referencing and include extra references and still do a very nice report and get a 12. So I can understand why it can be a concern, but it actually is, it's possible to do very focused analytical work and still include all these requirements that we have put in. So yeah, so I can understand it's not necessarily a matter of if it's easier for us to read. It's a matter of that we want a size that fits with a group of 5 or 6 students, where it's possible for you to shine because you get individual marks. So a thorough analysis that can show each of your personal individual work, and then the 20 pages, they fit nicely, where you can both refer to the case and you can describe the problems and analyze it, present a solution, discuss assumptions, etc. So it has worked for since 2006. So I think it works still, and it's not about punishing anyone.
So more questions? That's the chance now to ask.
Okay, yeah, but then we have a short break, and then we'll wait for our guests, and they will start the presentation at 10.
So then, welcome back, everybody. And I'm happy that we can today have an exciting challenge from Danfoss. We have here today Thomas Kolster, the head of service innovation, and Bjarke Osmundsen as analytics and insights manager in Danfoss. And they will present the challenge for you today. And we would like that you, of course, can afterwards ask a lot of questions to the two. We suggest that we concentrate a little bit on some of the models and theories from the class, so that not everyone can, of course, concentrate on all of them. So maybe here the left side looks a bit on the business model canvas and see, do you get all information from the talk, or there is anything open. And then the middle part, I would ask to look a bit at the star model and see whether you get all information from that. And then the right side, then please look a bit on the organizational theories that you heard about, so that you can come then up with some questions, maybe of missing information. So then we can start with the presentation. And I give the word to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. At least I get the sense that the mic is working. Good to see you and good to be here. So thanks for having us. Bjarke and I have been excited to come here and share a challenge with you, a challenge that we have had on our radar screen for quite a while in Danfoss, but due to, let's say, other priorities, strategic priorities, have not really managed to venture into completely yet. But we have, let's say, reviewed the market and decided that this is really an exciting opportunity, and we're now sharing that with you, and we're very excited to, first today, to get your initial questions and thoughts, but obviously also to see the final result of your work. So the challenge, in a nutshell, is about the cold chain. That might not be a term that rings a lot of bells. Maybe it does to some of you, but essentially the idea is that today we will spend some time, if I can make this work, here we go. We'll spend some time, of course, introducing Danfoss, introducing the business of Danfoss and the business of cooling. We'll go into introducing the cold chain, what it is, and from our point of view, what are sort of the challenges or the complexities of the cold chain. And we'll end off summarizing the, let's say, the strategic predicament that we're in and the challenge in entering the cold chain market at the end of the presentation. And then we should have plenty of room for questions and answers. Good. So before we do that, my name is Thomas Kolster, and I am head of service innovation. It's a new function in Danfoss because we as a company have decided that our mechanical engineering background, as proud as we are of that, is probably not enough to get us to where we want to be in the next 10, 15, 20 years. We also need to focus on digitalization, and we need to focus on what we call a service transformation. So rather than providing mechanical product, physical products, we also believe we have an opportunity to provide services. And that's essentially the journey that we're on. And Bjarke, maybe you can introduce yourself, just a minute or two.
Absolutely. So my name is Bjarke Osmundsen. I've been in Danfoss for around 4 years now. I've taken a few different positions within those 4 years, but now heading the effort on analytics and insights within Danfoss Cooling. So much in line with what Thomas just said, we are moving more and more towards services. Of course, what enables that is to use data better. So advanced services, utilizing the fancy words of AI, machine learning, etc. When it comes to predictive maintenance and these kind of efforts is basically what we are looking into from an innovation perspective. So I think that's the short intro to me.
Excellent. Good. So that is basically what we have on the plate for us for the next roughly 2-ish hours. So as the agenda says, we'll start from above. We'll start talking a little bit about Danfoss, and then eventually we'll zero in on the strategic challenge and the case at the end. So for those of you who may not know Danfoss very well, we're a Danish company. We are headquartered probably as far away from Copenhagen as you can be, in a small island called Als, close to the German border. This is where we were founded back in 1933, and we still have our main headquarters here, but essentially we're a global company. We operate in more than 100 countries, and let's just say that the Danish market is fairly insignificant for us, at least in terms of revenue. Very important for other reasons, obviously, but in terms of revenue, the majority of our business is either in North America or in China or in the larger markets of Europe.
I think worth mentioning is also we're headquartered in the southern part of Denmark, but we are also building up our capabilities in let's say, development hubs like in Copenhagen, like in Hamburg. So we're not only in the southern part of Denmark.
Absolutely, yeah. So really we are global in the sense that we believe that we need to be where also the talent pool is. Perhaps 15, 20 years ago, there was an idea that we could encourage everybody, every talent to join Danfoss and relocate to the region where Danfoss is. Right now we've over the past 10 years or so changed that, so we have offices in, I would say, many major cities around Europe and also outside of Europe to really have hubs where the talent pool is. But it did start in the island of Als back in 1933, where the founder and the let's say first generation of the family that still owns Danfoss had an idea. He was a mechanical engineer, and he had an idea for a valve. And he basically went to the roof of his parents' barn. He was living on a farm, and developed that valve. And that was the first, you say, modern refrigeration valve that was developed back then. So essentially Danfoss was, like many other companies, obviously, it was built on an idea and built on a vision that we could do something better than what we're already doing. So essentially what is in our DNA and what is also reflected in our aspiration is really to engineer tomorrow, which for some years now have been our punchline. You see that close to the Danfoss logo sometimes. And really invest and define our product development and our R&D strategy towards how can we really solve the problems of tomorrow. Also of today, obviously, but really looking more ahead. But we'll get into that a little bit later. So that's really reflected in our aspiration, and we believe very much in product quality and reliability of our products, and in innovation. So that's a key essence from the day back in 1933 that the company was founded, and still is today. So we do spend quite significant investments in R&D, and since the last 5 or so years, a part of that investment has also shifted more into software development or development of software solutions. So not just, let's say, engineering or R&D within mechanical products. We'll get into the products a little bit later. This is our founder, and the reason why I decided to bring this slide is really to emphasize that the DNA in Danfoss is very much around innovation, as I said, and this is continuously enforced by now the second generation of the Clausen family, where they make sure that everybody in Danfoss take it as their responsibility to really help shape the future and really live the, let's say, the DNA of the company, which is in essence innovation. So let's get a little bit into the detail. As I mentioned, I don't want this to be a history lesson, but I think it's important to understand where we're coming from. Back in 1933, as mentioned, we started in refrigeration with the first expansion valve for refrigeration systems. since then, the business in Danfoss has grown and now spans across what we call 4 main business segments or 4 main product areas. So the first one being cooling, where Bjarke and I are placed. Second one is heating, where we probably have our most well-known product, the radiator thermostat, that many of you, at least the ones that grew up in Denmark, recognize. We have power solutions that are working on hydraulics. This is a business that has grown quite a bit, so we have an existing business within what we call off-highway hydraulics, and we just recently acquired a division from Eaton, so Eaton Hydraulics, that are providing industrial hydraulics. So we have both off-highway, as we say, hydraulics, so construction, farming equipment hydraulics, and now industry hydraulics. And then finally, we have drives, frequency converters for any type of electrical engines in applications like conveyor belts, elevators, you name it. So those are the four businesses, and although some of the products up here are old, and many of our products that we are still selling are fairly old, that was, at least for me, quite interesting. When I joined Danfoss, I saw that many of the products that we sell the most of actually are more than 20-25 years old, and built on even older technology. And even though that is the case, still, to a certain extent, you would also hear our CEO mention this exact term more and more. We have never been more relevant. And why do we believe that we have never been more relevant as a company with our product offerings and our history? Well, essentially what we've been working on since day one is figuring out how can we optimize efficiency, how can we save energy, how can we basically get more with less. And if there's one mega trend driving both the legislative part and also commercial decision-making part, it's very much around sustainability and optimization. So whether it's for the environment or whether it's just for general cost savings, essentially it's the same, and that's really the business that Danfoss has been in since day one. So that's why we believe that we are very relevant. So getting more into the details here, just a couple of numbers. We're 28,000 employees. By next year, with the integration of Eaton Hydraulics, we'll be around 40,000. So quite a significant acquisition. We operate in more than 100 countries. What I wanted to get at was, if this one works, so we spend about 4.3% of our total top line on R&D, which is comparably a fairly significant number for at least the companies that we like to compare ourselves with. So quite a lot of investment is happening in R&D. And as mentioned, founded in 1933, still owned by the family, so we're still a family-owned company. Good. So I mentioned the 4 business areas. That's essentially also how we are organized. So if you look at the layer around here, these are the 4 businesses, and today we will dive into the cooling business. We also have let's say a regional abstraction layer that makes sure that we have salespeople, marketing people, customer service people, and business development close to the regions. So we don't run strategic decisions directly from the headquarters in Denmark. So we really also have people on the ground in all the important regions for us. Other than that, I think we have a number of group functions, global services like IT, HR, etc. Nothing really strange to that. So the setup is fairly what you know from similar companies, but essentially the group management team exists of the presidents of these 4 functions. So that's Erik, Jürgen, Vesa, and Lars, and our CEO, Kim Fausing, and our CFO, Jesper. So these are let's say the 6 key people in what we call our group executive committee or group executive team. Good. Final slides here about the numbers before we dive into the details. Essentially, Danfoss has been through, let's say, a strategic activity to carve out all the activities that were not considered core. And that has left us with these 4 business areas where we are either a market leader or a strong market contender. That's essentially what's driving where we decide to invest. We should either be looking at an opportunity to reach a market leader position or be a very strong contender. So we're market leader in heating, strong contender in the 3 other businesses. And as you can see, there's fairly weighted distribution in terms of revenue. Power Solutions being the largest business, cooling number 2, and then drives and heating follows. Good. So that was high-level Danfoss. Now let's go into cooling. I think it's always nice to just have a quick peek at the products. And I think especially for you, products are important, and I feel the same way. It feels difficult to understand a company if you don't understand the products that they're making. Obviously, we are, to a certain extent, acting as a conglomerate, Danfoss, so we have broad product ranges, let's say, aimed for a number of different industries and verticals. But in cooling, obviously, with a few exceptions, everything is about cooling. So acquiring the right temperature. So that means that we have compressors, we have valves, we have heat exchangers. We do also system solutions like evaporators that you can basically, it's a supersized air conditioner, you can say, that you can put into a cold room where you're storing foods or whatever. What we're also doing, and the reason why I'm highlighting that is because this is relevant specifically to this case, is that we have a family of electronic controls and gateways. So these are electronic products that basically can be applied in a cold room or a refrigeration cabinet or close to a compressor or any other part of the refrigeration system to monitor certain pieces of data like temperature, pressure, compressor rotation, you name it, many different types of data. This allows to control a compressor or a condensing unit, but there's also the opportunity of capturing that data and sending that to the internet, essentially. So there's IoT, if you will, connectivity also in the electronic controls and services business or product family. So this is essentially I will say that because this is also the part where Bjarke and I spend the most time. This is the smart part of cooling. Not that the other products are dumb, but this is where we really have the opportunity to connect our products with each other and also connect with the internet as well. So that's roughly the product line. Essentially, you can say for a refrigeration system, we make about up to 75% of the value of a total refrigeration system. So that could be a refrigeration system that is cooling this building here, if it's working. I'm not sure. It's feeling a little, it's a little hot here. Maybe it's resting. But essentially, very, very big refrigeration systems that can control ambient temperature in a room like this, but also can keep colder temperatures when you are storing foods in big storage facilities for breweries or slaughterhouses or whatever. We make up to about 75% of the value. What we don't make essentially are the pipes and the chemicals that go into a refrigeration system. More or less all other components Danfoss have in our family, in our product family. Good. So as mentioned, those are the products. Then if we look at the markets, we typically, let's say, structure the markets like what you have here. We have hypermarkets, supermarkets, convenience stores, food service are restaurants. The food and beverage industry are vending machines and so forth that you see on campuses like this. You put in a coin and you get a soft drink or whatever. Transportation, so solution for refrigerated trucks, reefers, so refrigerated containers, whatnot. And then we also have HVAC solutions, so or the HVAC market, which is essentially air conditioning for large buildings like this one. We are not in residential air conditioning, but basically everything but residential air conditioning we're in. And all together, these parts or segments, you can say, make up the cold chain. We'll get into that a little bit later. But when we look at the services, as I mentioned, the service journey that we're on, we are currently strong on hypermarket, supermarkets, so what we call food retail. So we have existing service offerings to food retail, but we do provide hardware all across to all different industry verticals here. Just a few words about the services that we provide today. We have basic monitoring services for supermarkets, which means essentially we have a setup through our electronic controls and gateways to monitor the temperature of a supermarket wherever in the world it may be. We have a monitoring sensor that reacts if a temperature in a given fridge is above the threshold, and they can take corrective action by calling the supermarket or by dispatching a technician to basically fix the issue before it impacts food quality or food safety. We also run a bunch of other services like energy optimization services. We provide dashboards and reports, so that's very much what Bjarke and Bjarke's team is involved in. Really get the most insight out of all the data in order to allow supermarkets to optimize their, let's say, operating efficiency. We're a little bit active in the other areas, but I wouldn't really dive into this in the sake of time. So let's move on. And essentially, the value proposition with our services today, you can see here, it's very much driven around food loss reduction, as the example I mentioned with the alarm monitoring. We also automate a lot of processes that helps the supermarket save time, and the different stakeholders that are working in the supermarket save time. Save service costs, because we can actually tell if there is a real issue with the compressor. Is that what causing the high temperature, or did somebody just forgot to shut the door? You wouldn't believe in 2020 how many times a service technician is called, drives 20 kilometers in a very big truck just to close the door and drive off again. It happens quite a lot. Obviously, that's one of the things that we can prevent if we have a simple door sensor, and we can say, well, probably an open door is the reason why your temperature is trending upwards. So maybe go close it and let's see. So many of these use cases aren't really rocket science. They're very, very straightforward. Good. So that was introducing Danfoss, introducing cooling, and to give you an idea of our existing service businesses, existing service business. So I think with that, Bjarke, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Thomas. All right, so let me just give you a brief intro of the cold chain, what that means, and why it's highly important to talk about. Am I muted? Should be unmuted now, I think, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Sure thing. Okay. Working now? Good. All right. I'll try again then. Introducing the cold chain. So, main challenge here is, of course, to keep food safe from the farm or the production all the way to the consumer. And that is obviously important because food in general is an issue, as you see here from the quote. a world where 1 in 9 people go hungry every day. Important that we don't waste food from the production to the consumer. How do we solve that? As you just saw, let's say the cooling business offer different options for actually having efficient cooling when it comes to energy. We can use different measures here like pre-cooling, cold storage, reefer trucks, etc. And all the way to the supermarkets or food service like restaurants, etc. Where at Danfoss we do have offerings for most of that. So obviously reduce wastage, new commercial opportunities should be there. That's why it's very relevant for Danfoss and also a general topic to have better solutions for digital connected cold chains. Just an example of that. So the complexity of the cold chain is obviously that there are a lot of different stakeholders involved when we go from farm to fork. So in this case, we just brought an example here of milk production. So what happens from, it goes from the cattle, as we mentioned here, so the production. Typically, we will have a lot of parts into this chain, even though it's a relatively simple example like milk. So what happens after the production? Then it will go into some kind of transport in a milk cooler, end up in a cold room, and from there some processing, and then into cool truck, storage, another transportation link, another storage, and then it goes into somewhere where a retailer can sell it to the end consumer. So hopefully you can see the picture that a lot of different stakeholders are involved just with a relatively simple cool chain that we all know fairly well. You can imagine that can differ a lot depending on what kind of food groups we are talking about. If we are talking about salmon production, then it looks a whole lot different. If we're talking about bananas that are transported with different modes of transportation from different regions, it looks different, right? So it's really not that simple, and it depends a lot on where is the end consumer and also what kind of product is it that we are selling. So in overall, the different stakeholders involved are typically some kind of food producers from the food producer. Then it goes into this kind of wheel in terms of logistics, some processing, and then in the end it goes into a food retailer. So when we look at the cold chain, then it's important to think about where are the opportunities, meaning where does food get lost, who's paying for it, so who's interested in these services, liability-wise, who's taking charge of which parts, and obviously, as this point also shows here, then there are major regional differences. Are we in Europe, where it's a relatively mature cold chain for most food groups? Is it in India or different parts of Asia? The picture is a lot different there. So the infrastructure maturity differs, obviously, depending on where we are in the world. So in the end, it's about also figuring out how the different stakeholders benefit from better temperature monitoring, keeping food safe, more energy efficient. Different macro factors come into play here as well. Legislation, political, you can count in the current pandemic situation. Many things here come into play when we're talking about this infrastructure. So with that, I think, hopefully you get a picture about cold chain, what it means, and also the complexity of it, which we'll go more into now as well as opportunities. You want to take that part, Thomas?
Yeah, I can do that. Opportunities, at the way we see it, and understand this as the way we see it, we might not see everything, or we might not capture all the different stakeholders, but we say roughly, if we look across the cold chain, there are 4 main stakeholders or potential, let's say, consumers of a connected cold chain. There's obviously food production. That these are the banana farmers, or it's the dairy farmers, or whoever that are basically reliant on the quality of the product that meets the end consumer at the end of the day. So obviously they're interested in building stronger relationships or basically manage the quality throughout the cold chain, because if by the time your milk leaves your dairy farm and it ends up in the supermarket spoiled, then how can you control liability, for example, and how can you, as the dairy farmer, make sure that it was not your problem, because you are most likely to be blamed, right? Because it's your product that ends up bad, but it might be an issue during handover to a logistics company where things ended up impacting the quality. For retailers, obviously maximizing shelf life of the product, because if you have complete temperature control and you have the ability to know when the temperature has not been right for a certain product, you would also know when to put cucumbers on sale, right? Just to give an example, typically how it works in food retail, it's the first thing that goes into the storage facility, is the first thing that goes into the store and is therefore sold, right? But there might be products that have had a over-ripening happening due to a bad temperature control in the cold chain, so you might want to sell that batch of cucumbers before the other one, even though you received the other one a day or two before. Just to give you an idea. And if you can manage that, then you can do both, basically a few things. You can reduce your food waste. So there's certainly for the food retailers a corporate social responsibility aspect to it. It's getting more and more important in the food retail industry. In some countries even, you are being fined if you're throwing away food. France, for example. And it's actually very expensive to throw away food if you are a food retailer. So you want to avoid that. But you also want to avoid that you don't have to put too many products on sale because they are over-ripening. Because you want to maximize the profit that you can make. You want to get the best price for the product that reached your store. For transportation and logistics, there's a lot of, well, we have the whole incident claim, right? So when in the cold chain has there been an issue, so who can we make responsible for that issue? Especially seeing that typically if we have just a batch of cucumbers, as my favorite example here, we import in Denmark, we import a lot of cucumbers from Spain. Just the people that are transporting cucumbers from A to B, typically you'll find between 5 and 10 handovers for a crate of cucumbers going from Spain to Denmark. So it's not one truck driver picking up the crate of cucumbers in Spain, driving it all the way to Denmark, saying bye-bye, and then heading back for another crate of cucumbers. It passes hands quite a lot of time, which also means that the liability can be fairly difficult to track back, and there are many potential errors in that process. Which also means that there are a lot of manual temperature controls today. Right, so there are typically in the refrigerated trucks, there are temperature sensors, and you would say if you are the truck driver and you're responsible for taking a crate of cucumbers from South Germany to Hamburg, for example, you just have to make sure that the temperature is right inside your truck. That's the only thing you care about. So you do manual controls, and you might do that a few times. So that happens, you know, for every transporter and for every storage facility quite a few times. If you can automate that, obviously you can save a lot of time. And you also remove the human error of mistake in that process. And then finally for consumers, well, wouldn't it be great to know that the apple or the salmon that you're buying, you can get a guarantee that it's been treated from a temperature point of view in the right way. But also, if you just have connected data following the product, imagine what else you could do. You could even bring more data to the consumer, so you would know where that apple comes from, or where the salmon comes from, or avocado, or whatever. So many benefits. These are just some of them that we mention here, and these, the way we see it, are the four main, let's say, stakeholders that benefit from the connected cold chain.
And I think fair to say also that these are evolving quite a lot. Food production is evolving quite a lot. We see new trends in food production coming up all the time. For instance, on-land fish farming is becoming a bigger and bigger trend. We have on-land fish farms in Denmark, and a big one is being built now in Florida. Also vertical gardening, etc., meaning that we move food production closer to the consumer. For the consumer, as Thomas mentioned, transparency, sustainability, etc., becoming more and more important to all of us, I think. So these different stakeholders are moving as well, both technology-wise and also in terms of how we feel about food production. Yeah, the complexity of the cold chain. I don't know whether you want to start that one as well, Thomas.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we've talked about it or mentioned it, but this is just to make it very obvious that throughout the cold chain you have the different stakeholders, and I used the cucumber example before. But essentially the point is that they are organized today in silos, right? So you would have on the food production side, so on this part of the slide, you would have systems in place that monitor the temperature inside, let's say the truck that transports the raw milk for the farm, from the farm to the dairy plant. Then you would load off the raw milk, and then you would have a different monitoring silo that monitors the temperature of the production of the milk. Then you would hand that over to transportation, different silo, so on and so forth, right? So you don't really have a connected, let's say, temperature control that spans over the different silos in the cold chain. And that's essentially the challenge and opportunity in the connected cold chain to do that. But today, this is the scenario, right? You have verticals. It doesn't mean that you're not monitoring temperatures or you're not monitoring essential data for the product. It just happens in verticals, right? And the only thing, as we try to indicate here, that more or less follows the product from start to end is some sort of EAN code or any unique identifier that does follow the product, at least from production to the retail side. Yeah, and essentially the same challenge here, also worth considering from our point of view. That what we also see is that. Let's take the example with the cucumbers again. They're transported in big batches, right? So a crate or a number of crates of cucumbers are perhaps transferred in a container truck, so a temperature-controlled container truck from Spain to a central distribution hub in Denmark. Then that container is being opened and crates are being redistributed either directly to the supermarkets or to other distribution hubs. So as you can imagine, there might be a way of measuring the temperature of all the products when it's in the container. But as you split it up, you need to somehow figure out a way to make sure that the data from the first part of the journey follows. But then these take out different journeys, right? Different potential temperature journeys. And the same here as we move along and split the crates even further. We can take it in the Q&A session if it's not clear, but this is essentially one of the challenges of being able to monitor the cucumber all the way to the supermarket, because it starts as one of many cucumbers and then it gets split up and split up and split up and distributed in different directions.
Yeah, I think we can go more in depth with that in the Q&A as well, as it seems like time is running. So let's spend a bit of time on presenting the case as well, more in detail. As we just explained a bit about, then there are a lot of different potential benefits and opportunities, or sorry, challenges when it comes to the cold chain. So just summarizing some of the benefits, there are benefits around sustainability, reducing food waste, ultimately also leading to reduction of CO2 emissions. Energy efficiency you can count in there as well. The commercial aspect, new business opportunities, new partnerships, etc. And then of course the consumers in the end being us, happy consumers, transparency, we know we have better products. So that summarizes it in three groups here, I'd say. And for the challenges, summarizing that as well, there is no complete owner of the cold chain. A producer typically will be liable for the goods until they reach some kind of retail distribution center or the store. And the retailer only takes responsibility when they receive the goods. However, if there were issues before, then it means something to the shelf life in the store, right? So it's not like if there have been issues before, then they will still have the issue in the end, right? So, but these kind of liability boundaries mean something in terms of how we address the different stakeholders. So there are different values for different stakeholders within this cold chain. So the question is, whose pain point do we want to address and who pays for what? As we don't have a cold chain where everyone owns the whole lot. So those are some of the challenges and benefits summarized here. So that means we need to think about also how do we solve the issue with a tech solution. Different technologies can be applied here. I plotted some here on the right-hand side. Obviously, there could be something around blockchain in terms of traceability, transparency, IoT, AI, and then I plotted the last one here. You can add more technologies, more buzzwords here, of course, as well. My point is, there are many options here. What we struggle with to figure out, and where we would like your inputs also, is to figure out what is feasible. So look at the use case first, instead of looking into a technology first, I'd say, right? So how do we solve the issue, and then figure out what's the measures that we need for that. What data is needed? So one thing is, of course, the temperatures, but bear in mind there could be others as well, depending on what kind of food group we are looking into. Humidity could be one, light, shock, so vibration, right? So imagine a pallet of tomatoes with a huge shock or a vibration, not very good, right? So there could be different measures, not only temperature, even though temperature typically is the one that we're looking at. Then lastly, how do we make that data available in the format where it makes sense? So making it available to the right stakeholders in the right format. So there's some kind of solution design here as well. So for instance, the truck driver, will he see the info of the temperature with a tablet, or what kind of media does he use, and what does the solution look like, right? So that's also an element here. Who will see this data, what kind of insights is needed, and how does that improve the cold chain in the end? So in the end, I'd say, yes, we need to think about the tech solution, but look also at how do we solve the issue for the different stakeholders, right?
Yeah, but really to re-emphasize that, right?
Yeah.
Don't start with the technology, right? The technology is an enabling solution. I've seen many reports that try to highlight the value of blockchain in something like this. And although I do understand and can see the value, potential value, let's not start there. Let's figure out what are the actual problems that we're trying to solve. And then eventually we backwards into engineer and we get to some sort of solution on the technology, whether it's blockchain or it's passive sensors or whatever it is, RFID, we can figure that out. But really, essential is to really understand what is the problem that we're trying to solve and how does that add value so we can actually commercialize it, so we can turn it into a product.
And there are many companies in this space. Once you start to look into it, IBM Food Trust, for instance, for blockchain, and there are many players. And I think we'll go a bit into partners as well, partnerships as one thing that we're interested in as well. Yeah, so wrapping it up, the case in a nutshell. So what we would like your help on is on different aspects here when it comes to both figuring out the market focus. So where does it make sense to start, right? That's the key issue. So specific regions, like I said, Europe is a lot different than India. Would it make sense to start in either of those? What are the pros and cons? And also the products. So is it, for instance, this example I mentioned with salmon, so on-land fish farming for salmon, luxury goods, I'd say, sold at a pretty high price, where it's highly important that it keeps its quality, or is it more on the lower end in terms of could be different fruits, vegetables, that could also have a value there. So the point is, it's probably unrealistic for Danfoss to say, okay, we just go in for cold chain in a wall. That's not feasible, obviously. So we need to start somewhere. So where does it make sense in terms of a market focus? Then we have the organizational setup. So in overall change management in the organization, what is needed? So Thomas and I, we are in a part of the organization where we deal with services, IoT, and are working more digital. But don't forget, Danfoss, we come from mechanical engineering. So we're moving more and more into software services. So what is needed? What is the right organizational setup to make this work from our side? Along with that, probably we don't solve this whole issue ourselves. We need some partners. We need to partner on many different aspects, probably, depending again on what is the market focus, right? But who do we need to work with, and how would that? How could that look?
Yeah, so just to give you an example, is it a joint venture between Danfoss and a number of other companies, main stakeholders in this, whether it's on the retail side or logistics side? That could be an option. But as Bjarke said, since the cold chain is so broad and complex and there's no one clear owner, at least looking into partnerships, or at least broadening the perspective that Danfoss is probably or perhaps not going to solve this alone. I think it makes sense to at least look into the partnership setup. How much emphasis you want to put that, at least from my point of view, is up to you. But it's certainly an important aspect of to consider in this challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. As just mentioned, technologies, what will be needed there, what prerequisites will we need for the technical setup, and how does that support the value proposition. Finally, go to market. So how could this rollout plan look? Who are the important stakeholders? Who needs to be on board? So that's also a highly important aspect. So as you see, a bit of different areas that we're interested in covering. Maybe it's not feasible for you to cover the whole thing. I'm not sure about how many pages you have and how much time, but probably you need to dive a bit into some of them. But that's something that we can discuss in the Q&A as well, what will make sense. And you're quite a few of groups, so probably it will also be distributed in a way here.
Yeah, just a final word to the go-to-market, right? Because this is essentially one of the key questions, right? What is the value proposition and to whom, right? So we mentioned the different stakeholders. We had the previous slide about the 4 main stakeholders. And for us, this is one of the key questions. So where should we address our value propositions? Where would this make sense to basically try to sell? Where is the value the highest? Is it for the retailers? Is it for the food producers? Is it for the transportation companies? Or is it basically for all 3 or all 4? And if so, what would the product look like? Just to emphasize, this is really as the way I see it, the essential aspect of the challenge here. Who is this most beneficial to? And can we do it just driving the product towards the food retailers and only focus on the food retailers or the transportation companies? Or should there be a value proposition towards all aspects of the cold chain?
Right, okay. I think that wraps up the intro from our side.
Then we could start with the questions to Thomas and Bjarke. Are there any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're saying that no one owns the cold chain. And so you're also the second largest company in the cooling industry, as you're saying. So you have competitors which are also looking into the cold chain. And probably they'll be also providing the same kind of products to the different stakeholders in the cold chain. So how willing is Danfoss as a company to kind of integrate their larger cold chain system with other company products? Like, what's the how does Danfoss act in that market?
Yeah, so the question is around, if I understand it correctly, the willingness from Danfoss or the general industry side to collaborate with competitors or integrate with competitors, or yeah, Yeah. It's certainly not something that we've seen before, but we've seen it in other industries, right, where you are entering into collaborations about standardizing data models, for example. I think that there's a certain notion of legislation to consider if Danfoss and let's say our main competitor forms a joint venture. So probably the format of that collaboration, I think, is more open. But it's seen in other industries, and I think that's certainly also relevant for us to consider entering into some sort of non-profit organization or whatever the setup would be, together with other players in order to normalize data, right? Because if we have different data norms for different verticals, it makes it difficult to allow the data to flow through the entire cold chain. So something like that I see with regards to formalizing a commercial offer together, I don't think so.
1, 2.
I have a couple of questions. The first one is regarding the financial standpoint for this venture. You talk about maybe joining with other partners. Would you want to, financially also want to join in on the spending of this? Because this seems like quite a costly thing to venture into. So what's the financial standpoint of you guys? Do you want to spend all the money on this yourself, or do you want to go together with other people in order to afford venturing into this market?
Yeah. Did you have other? We take this question first, and then we. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a big investment, but there might also be ways of venturing into this without making a really big upfront investment. So there might be, as Bjarke also mentioned, niche focus either on geographical regions or specific products like salmon, as we mentioned, one example, that might create a minimum viable product for us, so to speak, and not expose the whole complexity of the food supply chain or the cold chain. But essentially, really to answer or to address your question, yeah, if we go with partnerships, obviously it means that we would be willing to share revenue from whatever comes out, and also looking to share then the cost of the upfront investment, whether it's pulling on domain expertise or actual financial commitments from both sides. So that is the essence of any type of partnership.
Yeah. So adding to that, right? As we just mentioned, let's make it use case based, right? So what is the market focus, and what kind of investment will that take? Yes, we will not be here if we're not strategically interested in this topic and also willing to invest. But probably we will not establish a global blockchain, right, and do that kind of investment. So you need to figure out where it makes sense to invest, and that's also part of the task here, really, to figure out.
Yeah.
The second question is, you talk about this journey of the cucumber and how it starts as one batch and then it gets split up maybe up to 5 times along the journey. Is this kind of splitting up process something that's planned ahead? Like, do you have an idea of which cucumber goes where and by how much, so that this journey is something that you have knowledge about before the journey takes place, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, good question. No, we don't know that upfront. So what we know, at least from the supermarkets that we collaborate with, is that there are the purchasing department that buy big numbers of products, and they put that in a central storage facility, right? So if we take a Danish supermarket group like Salling Group, they had storage facilities 2 places in Denmark, and they basically distribute their purchases to these facilities. Then basically, in simple terms, they resell the products to those supermarkets that need them, right? So if you are a store manager of a Føtex supermarket and you're running low on cucumbers, you basically go through the ERP system and you order the quantity of cucumbers that you need. So it's not pre-ordered and then ordered by the producer. So you would know exactly where the flow goes. You know that the main order, the big crates, goes to the central storage facility, and what happens from there, you don't know.
And the last question in terms of identifying key stakeholders, you say that right now the producer is in charge or liable for the whole transportation phase until you reach the retailers. Is that, like, who has decided that that's how it is, basically? Is that something that can be changed? Are supermarkets willing to kind of share that liability, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, and maybe correction, because that I don't think I was too clear on that. That it's not always the case. So good question. It's not always the case that the producer is liable all the way. It depends a little bit on the so-called Incoterms that you agree. So in some cases, also when you hand over the products to the truck, as a producer, your liability ends, and then the liability is either with the buyer, so that could be the supermarket chain, or shared between the supermarket chain and the logistics partner, or shared between the producer and the logistics partner. So it's very different how the liability is depending on the different terms. Yeah, good question.
First of all, thank you for a nice presentation. You talked a lot about the food industry. Would you say that the scope is exclusively within that, or can you imagine other industries where you can use the cold chain to kind of, yeah?
So far, we've been focusing on the food industry, but I think there's a very recent thing happening in the world right now where you also use cold chain for something else than food, like vaccines, for example, so medicine. I would say that to a certain extent, yes, I mean, to answer your question, yes, the cold chain is not just relevant for food. You use it for vaccines and a few other things as well. So within the healthcare or the healthcare industry, there's difference in the complexity in the cold chain, because the complexity of the cold chain in healthcare is lower than in food retail, which also means that there are more existing solutions out there already. So I'm currently debating with myself if we should say that it could also be really interesting and relevant for us to get, let's say, solutions on a connected cold chain based on healthcare or based on vaccines or anything non-food related, because it's certainly also on our radar in Danfoss, for sure. Yeah.
I'd say our starting point is the food chain, but it doesn't mean that we're not interested in other areas when it comes to cold chain. I think that would wrap it up, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's both are relevant, but the main question was, are there other applications for connected cold chain than food? And yeah, the answer is absolutely there is. Yeah.
There's several questions here on the chat. The first one is, who is number one in the cooling segment?
Yeah. Well, depends on how you slice and dice the industry, right?
I'm glad you took this one, Simon.
Well, typically, we, at least in Danfoss, we like to compare us with a US-based competitor called Emerson. They are, in many areas, number one, right? If we look at cooling, they look very much like Danfoss. They have the same rough product family with a few differences, but roughly they are the ones that we like to compare ourselves with, and we consider them as the market leader. So number one, Emerson Climate Technologies.
I had some question regarding the food chain, as you were mentioning. So regarding the different things, let's say cucumber or milk or salmon, they have different point where they can be preserved very well. So have you tried what are your expect regarding those kind of things? Well, consumer producer is setting up the whole from different perspective to the end, like at the store. So how it get carried out, like in the different because at the end it gonna be in the same container where it will be the standard kind of the temperature, not specified, because every food has different point where it
Right.
is the best to keep to the storage. So how you have carried out those kind of things, because it sounds complicated.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So depending on the type of food, you have certain thresholds. And there are typically industry standards that state that, for example, fresh salmon is trans or should be kept within this threshold, right? A certain temperature threshold. Same thing goes with milk. Same thing goes with cheese, meat, etc. So basically, this is defined by the producer. But what we also see in some cases, it can be overruled by the supermarket. Because essentially when the supermarket buys the product or makes an order of 10,000 avocados, for example, they have the ability to say, we want the avocados to be transported or kept within this temperature range. Because for some products, especially fruits and vegetables, there's also the ripening aspect to consider. So you would, in some cases, might want to use the transportation as part of the ripening process. So whether you want, and avocados are a great example, whether you want ready-to-eat avocados once they arrive, or you want unripened avocados that can be kept for a week or a week and a half before they ripen. So I would say the buyer, essentially, which in most cases are the supermarket, they define the threshold. Whether it's actually kept, that's another thing, because essentially there's no end-to-end connected cold chain, so they have absolutely no way of checking it. What they do, the supermarkets, when they receive the products at the central distribution centers, they do spot checks. So that means if they receive avocados, they have probes, temperature probes, and they basically put a probe inside somewhere in the middle of the crate, and they probe an avocado to check the core temperature. And if that temperature is within the desired, let's say, temperature range, they accept it. If it's not, they can legally decline the product and send it back. But it only gives them a snapshot of the temperature today. It doesn't tell them that if throughout the transportation process the temperature has been too high or too low. It only gives them the indication once it reaches the supermarket part of the supply chain, is the temperature right or not? I hope that answers the question.
So I have a question regarding data, and like, have you experienced any partners or people being unwilling or less likely to want to share their data with everybody? Because I imagine that a lot of companies would not want to share their data with you or their competitors or everybody else, during the process.
Yeah.
Good question. So I think it comes down to who is actually driving this agenda. Is it the food retailers buying the products that do want traceability all the way through and that can thereby push the logistic companies and everyone that do handle the goods on the way? Or is it the producers? So we're leaving this agenda. Because if the logistic company is not willing to provide that info, then it's not viable if the food retailer is pushing for it, right? So it's about figuring out who is actually willing to push this agenda. And then I don't think, my assumption would be that there will not be issues in terms of being willing to share the data. It's more about figuring out who will take charge in terms of figuring out what is the solution, technology-wise, and who's then pushing it.
Mm. But to build on that, and I agree, we are also getting more comments, questions about data security and cybersecurity, because that seems to be a topic that obviously takes or fills some time and mind space with many of the whether it's food retailers or food producers or distribution companies. So we are getting questions with our existing services, right? How are we storing the data, and how can we guarantee that that it isn't at risk for cybersecurity? I would say the benefit in our case is that we're talking about temperatures of avocados, so it's fairly non-sensitive data. We're not dealing with people's personal data or really other types of sensitive data. But even though we're talking temperature about products, we are getting these questions more and more. So it's a valid point or a valid comment, but we haven't really had issues with companies saying they're not willing to share data. I think the essence is, if I were to share something with you, I just want to know the benefit. And if I see the benefit, then I'm more likely to share. So I would sort of turn it around and say, if we can provide a good reason why it makes sense to share your data, then I don't foresee any main issues with that type of data, at least.
We have several questions here. There are 3 from Christoph. One is a yes, no question. Is Danfoss interested in covering the whole cold chain? And the other one is, does Danfoss want to guarantee the cold chain? The guarantee is the... So these are the 2 first ones, and then the third. So, are you interested in covering the whole chain, and do you want to guarantee it?
Good question. I would answer it like this. I think if we as Danfoss only provide partial transparency throughout the chain, I don't think we'll be successful. I think it's very arbitrary, it's very either or, because if we only let's say cover from the point where the food retail, the supermarket receives the goods all the way till it reaches the actual supermarket, we're still not able to guarantee or to provide full transparency that this product is good and it's going to live up to its shelf life, for example. Because we wouldn't be able to say if this cucumber was standing in a truck on the German Autobahn in the south of Germany in summer, it being exposed to 45 degrees for 18 hours. Right? We wouldn't know that if we only cover part of the chain. So I would say, at least based on my best knowledge, we need to be able to have a solution that covers the entire chain end to end. And that's why we really call it end to end. Whether it's Danfoss that does everything, now that's another question, right? That could also happen in partnerships with others. But I think the customers need end-to-end coverage.
Yeah, I think it taps a bit into the discussion about liability as well, as we had earlier. But I think from a platform perspective, it only makes sense to think about this as one cold chain and monitoring the whole thing. So I think, yes, we would be interested in that. Do we need partners? Yes, we do. But in overall, in terms of monitoring, yes, we would be interested in the full cold chain. Will we be willing to take responsibility for the whole cold chain? Probably not. But the monitoring part, we're interested in the whole part, at least conceptually.
Yeah, but then again, I mean, I like the questions because I like the question about taking responsibility, because I think it's, from a strategic point of view, it's interesting, right? Because we're essentially then moving towards cold chain as a service, or whatever you want to call it, and as a service business model. And I would say, just for the sake of this challenge, sure. I mean, if you think it's relevant, I would like to hear how that would work. I think it's an interesting idea. I also see challenges, obviously, but I think for the sake of the challenge, of course, that could be an option if we have the transparency needed and we can turn that into a viable business model for us. Absolutely.
Next question is then, are you able to create this new method and have companies to adapt it, or does it need to be integrated in existing methods?
So by method, I'm assuming we're talking about the infrastructure or the, let's say, the enabling technology in order to have a connected end-to-end cold chain. Yeah, no. We have, given our existing service business, we have our cloud solution, right? That basically monitors everything within the supermarket. Now the challenge really is, as we explained, the end-to-end cold chain monitoring, where you need to do monitoring on reefers and on in trucks, in storage facilities, etc. Technically, there's nothing difficult in creating abstraction layers between clouds, and I might be going a bit way off course here on cloud computing or the essence of IoT and cloud computing. But technically, it's certainly possible that you can create an abstraction layer that connects certain clouds. So if you just have a cloud for every vertical, sure, you just need to make sure that there is transparency and connections between the clouds, assuming that they follow the same data.
And to have the right hardware in all the different parts of the chain.
And that's the other thing, right? So you also need the right sensing hardware. And remember, we had the issue with the crates being split up and distributed. So even those sensors are getting cheaper and cheaper by the minute, and you can buy pretty decent sensors out of Alibaba Express for just a few dollars. It's probably not viable to put a sensor on every cardboard box of cucumbers, right? So that aspect we also need to consider. And then maybe in some cases passive sensors might work, right? But that doesn't give you live updates, but at least it will give you transparency once you download the data from the passive sensor. So all that's part of the, let's say, the question that needs to be solved once we figure out what is the actual solution that the customers are looking for.
Yes.
I hope that somewhat answered the question.
Otherwise, I'm sure they will get back to us. There's a question from Katarina. She asks, have you thought about revenue streams, sale of complete services package or continuous service payments, like a subscription?
Yes, we have thought about it. And the way we do business today, the way we do the food retail business is a SaaS-type business model. It means basically that we charge a certain fee a month per supermarket. And that fee is basically determined by the level of service that we provide. So if we just provide simple data, simple visualization of data, the fee is lower. If we provide full 24/7 monitoring, that fee is obviously higher. So that's the SaaS business model is something that we're doing today. But with regards to cold chain, yes, we have considered many options. It can also be charging by API calls, for example. So we're not limiting you or ourselves at this point. That could be part of the solution, right? The go-to-market considerations, right? What are the, let's say, the business models? What do they look like so they make most sense to the customer with regards to the, let's say, the end product?
Yes, so is there any information that follows products as they travel, for example, a barcode, GPS, is the way you do it now?
Not the way we do it, right? So if you remember the slide that we had before, essentially, Bjarke, can you pull back to that one?
Which one are you?
Go back. That one. Yeah. So indicated by the green line here, essentially the only thing that follows a product is the barcode. And the barcode depends on the standard, whether it's GS1 or the different EAN standards, holds certain information. But it certainly doesn't hold temperature information or anything. It's basically something that the product is born with. And there's some legislative requirements to barcodes, and I'm not a specialist on the topic, but sort of country of origin and that not even expiration date, for example. When we talk food, you don't see expiration date in the barcode. That's why it's printed, on the cardboard box, the milk carton or whatever it is. So it's very basic information, but today that's the only thing that is basically following the product from the time it gets packaged, essentially, till it reaches the end consumer.
Okay. Do you currently, this is a question from Thomas, do you currently have people with the competences to deliver a surveillance type product, or is hiring new people part of the investment?
Yeah, I think Thomas mentioned that we have this existing service business going, where we have, is it around 15,000 supermarkets connected to that?
Mm.
So yes, we do have the experience there, both in terms of how we do the subscription model, in terms of revenue streams, and also the call-out centers or the call centers, where we do the monitoring 24/7, and the cloud platform basically for the cloud delivered services. So that part of the infrastructure we have for food retail. So yes, I'd say we have the basis there. And thereby not said that we might need to add to that, of course, but the basis at least.
I was just about to say it probably requires more investments, but we have the knowledge and we have the foundation.
Okay. There's a question from Runlin. Are you cooperating with other companies through the entire cold chain? If you had other cooperators, how to ensure the transparency, visibility through the chain with many users?
Yeah, so short answer to that is basically no. So we're not cooperating on full end-to-end cold chain. We have, as I showed in one of the previous introduction slides with our products, we have products and components and solutions for all verticals of the cold chain. But when we're talking end-to-end cold chain, no collaboration at all. We provide monitoring services. Once the product reaches the supermarket, we can tell you exactly the temperature of the orange, but we cannot tell you anything or what happened to the orange before that. So we're not collaborating across, but we're collaborating and providing solutions in the silos of the cold chain.
Okay. Then there is another question. Are there any current legislation in place that Danfoss sees as a threat to enter the cold chain market?
As a threat? I would say quite the opposite, actually, from the top of my mind. I see more opportunities in legislation and, well, I would say macro trends in general. So remember the benefit of a connected cold chain, or the end product, is essentially a reduction of food waste or food loss throughout the cold chain. What we know is generally that 1/3 of all food that's being produced and meant for consumption is lost or wasted throughout the cold chain. 1/3. That's quite significant. And in some regions, more than half of that is due to bad temperature control. In other regions, it's just because we buy too much and we don't care to eat it. So, the cold chain doesn't really solve that, but there are definitely aspects that the cold chain can solve. I got lost there. What was the question again? Can you repeat it?
There was this, are there any current legislation in place that Danfoss sees as a threat?
Yeah, no, I don't see any threats in legislation. I see the opposite, right? Because there, as I mentioned, in France, a law was passed, I think it was last year or early this year, that supermarkets that throw out food would have, or supermarkets essentially cannot throw out food. But there are, of course, exceptions to that, but it's very costly for the supermarket. So the legislation is more pushing towards adopting technologies like connected cold chains. I can't, from the top of my mind, come up with, threats directly.
I think it's also more accelerating this development, actually, as Thomas is saying.
Okay. Then there is a question about if you have the in-house capabilities to solve the mentioned tech solutions, but I think you answered that question before.
Mm.
Then there is a question from Nathan. If you're not taking any responsibility but monitoring, how could you take the other parts as responsible?
The other parts?
Not exactly sure what is meant.
Well, let me just tell you what we do today, and then we can say, is that the right thing to do? Is that the viable thing to do? But essentially, what we do today is that we pass on problems, or we make customers aware that they have problems. We don't always solve them, and customers are actually okay with that. So take the example of temperature monitoring and the the funny example with the open door that I mentioned. For some of our customers, depending on a service level agreement, we're actually not supposed to solve the problem. We're just supposed to notify them that they have a problem. So what we do in some cases is that we just call the customer and say, you have a high temperature in that particular cold room, and that's all I know. So we basically inform that they have a problem, pass on the problem, and then move on. That's actually a pretty significant part of our existing services today. So I know it sounds strange to us, but it's in some cases enough for our customers that they just become aware that they have problems in due time.
And also, it doesn't mean that we do not take responsibility, because if we fail to inform the customers, then we're responsible of a potential food loss.
Yes.
So
that's a very good point, right? We have service level agreements that typically, if we do not inform a customer within 60 minutes that there's a high temperature alarm happening, we are basically liable for the food loss, which can be very expensive. So one freezer with salmon, for example, can typically cost us $50,000 altogether if we miss one alarm. So we are liable in that sense that if we don't pass on the problem, and we're supposed to, then it's on us.
Okay. I don't know if we have any. Yeah, there's some hands here, so I think we will go with the auditorium for a few minutes.
Yes, do you have any existing partnerships or large partnerships with supermarkets or Arla or, I don't know, other places around the world as well in the food industry?
Well, we have direct, buyer-seller relationships with supermarkets, right? So supermarkets are our customers when we're talking services. So we have direct access to supermarkets, and we have fairly good relations with the supermarkets. We don't have, so if we look at the cold chain again, if we look at the logistics side, I would say we don't have really good relations with logistics because this is what we call an OEM market. We create components, we sell it to distributors or those that build the refrigeration, let's say the evaporators, but sell them on to the logistics people. So here we are a little bit further away, you can say. But for the supermarkets, we have direct relations. For the food producers as well, so big customers like breweries, Heineken, Carlsberg, etc. We're selling directly to those. Same thing with slaughterhouses like in Denmark, Danish Crown, etc. But the transportation, we don't really have good relations or direct relations, I would say. We have started to open up for IT partnerships. So we are partners with Microsoft. We are building our cloud solution based on Microsoft Azure. So it also means that Microsoft and Danfoss has not just a technical partnership, but also commercial partnership. So we're an ISV partner. So that means independent software vendor. Because the cloud solution we developed, we based that on Microsoft Azure, meaning that Microsoft is also interested in helping us sell our product because that means that they sell more Azure subscriptions to us when we onboard more customers. So we do have some partnerships on the IT side with Microsoft at the moment.
And I think it's important to add here as well that we are involved in many parts of the chain here, let's say probably all of them, when it comes to hardware, right? But that means, as Thomas rightfully said also, that typically it goes through an OEM or something like that, where we don't have direct contact to the, let's say, the end customer, besides when it comes to services like we have for food retailers. In that one, we go directly to the food retailers, the supermarket chains, right? So there's this distinction, which I think is important here.
Yep.
Yeah, I had actually 3 questions, but yeah, one was already asked. I have a question regarding, can you give more information over the cost structure? And the second one was, what are your preferred channels for the supplying? As given the more focus on the sustainability, do you prefer like more towards the environmental friendly? And yeah, food wastage is also a problem. So how you wanna make up with both of those things? So what are your prefers on the channels and with cost structure as you are making the components as well? So yeah.
Okay, so the first one was cost structure, or?
Yeah, as you are making components as well for cooling,
Yeah.
and you will be going towards the supply chain. So what is your preferred best of both, like, so that you can maintain cost structure as well, and your preferred channel that which will be the best?
So are you asking specifically to sort of introducing services as well on top of the hardware? Okay, good. Then I got you. Yeah, good question. So this is part of the change management aspect of going from a mechanical engineering company to a software as a service company. And I can tell you what I tell to my engineering colleagues to stir up some reactions, to be honest. I say that if I look from the services point of view, I just see the hardware as enabling products, right? So maybe think about what Canon and other printer companies did some years back, right? They said, we don't want to make money out of the printers. The real money is in the ink and the ink cartridges. So we basically just make sure that customers buy our printers, because then we lock them down to buy our ink, which is ridiculously expensive, and we make a ton of money on that. So that's at least one business model. I don't think we will apply that to the same extent in Danfoss, right? Because we have a very good business selling hardware, and we'll continue to have that business selling hardware. But there might be instances where we would say that we would reduce our profitability requirements on certain product groups because we know that it enables services, and that we believe selling a service is more profitable than selling a mechanical compressor. And it's easier, right? Mechanical compressors are heavy. They are pretty expensive to transport. They're expensive to develop. And if they break down, that's a nightmare as well. So we would much rather, I'm probably going to get in trouble with some of my engineering colleagues, but we would much rather sell services because they're easier to deliver, they have higher profitability, and higher flexibility in the sense that we can modify the products as we move along. If they fail, we can patch them. We don't have to recall them and fix them and spend a lot of time there. So I hope that answers roughly the question, that there will be, and I definitely consider that in the challenge here, that there may be cases where we would be willing to compromise profitability in certain hardware products if we believe that the business case at the end of the day is good, because it will then trigger more service sales that have higher profitability.
And also reminds me of the journey that we have had on our services for food retail, because in the very beginning, I think something around 15 years ago when we started the service business, the service element was more of an add-on, something that we gave almost for free when selling the products. So that meant that profitability was not good, but we increased the install base quite significantly. So collected more and more data, improved the services over the year, and now it's fairly profitable with the services, and probably we are more interested in services than products. Again, I would not discuss it with my product managers, but I'd say that it's getting more and more important also for the revenue stream of services at least.
You had one other question, right? I don't think we answered that completely.
How you want to amplify, but I got if you want to decrease your profitability.
Yeah, okay. Good.
So a bit of a longer question regarding the chain. So basically you have solutions for each part of the chain. You can install cooling units in trucks, in warehouses, etc. And you could maybe also imagine you could somehow have those systems talk together or do some sort of tracking that would make that process more transparent. But what about the handover in between those different links? So when a truck pulls up to a warehouse, you could imagine if that happens in Spain, it's quite significant if a load of salmon is outside for, let's say, half an hour or something before being transferred into a closed unit where you can monitor something. And you talked about, obviously, we don't want to put tracking systems on each individual box, so that handover period will be quite difficult for your products to kind of trace. So would you be interested in, for example, knowing specifically the time something arrives to when it arrives in another one of these chain links, or how do you see the solution to controlling these handovers and ensuring temperature quality over those handovers?
Yeah, nice. I see somebody's already going into solution mode here. But really good questions. So if I get it right, this is I cannot give you a really good straight answer because then I would be solving half of the challenge, I think. And this is actually why we also initially said that perhaps it would make sense to focus on specific product groups. Because, yeah, I said in the case of the cucumber, probably doesn't make sense to have even a simple passive sensor following 10 pieces of cucumber. But perhaps in other high-value products like salmon, avocado, different kinds of meats, maybe it would actually make sense. Because then imagine that you have a passive sensor or a low-cost active sensor that actually follows smaller crates throughout the cold chain. Then you would eliminate the challenge that you say, the handover and the different, I call them black spots in the cold chain, right? If you consider the cold chain as a continuous time series of temperature data, it cannot be broken, right? Because every time you have a black hole, you have to assume that it's all of a sudden 800 degrees hot and it ruins the exact product because you don't know. So having a sensor that follows the product would eliminate that part. And that would be feasible for some product types that are more expensive or at, let's say, higher risk of spoiling if the temperature isn't kept. But how to handle the handover points if you don't have a sensor following the product? Yeah, I don't know. As you said, you can if you have the same data standard that follows the different, let's say, controls or sensors that are installed in the production facility, in the storage facility, in the transport facility, then you can basically create an abstraction layer, even though you have 3 different solutions or 3 different clouds, as you can see up here, that sort of connects that. But the prerequisite for that is a common data model. Does that make sense? And then you would have, of course, certain periods of time where the handover happens, where you would have to accept a black hole. But if that's a minute here and there, probably not a big issue at the end of the day. Yeah.
And allow me to add a bit to that as well, because I really like that question with the sign-off, or when it goes from one part of the chain to another one. That's typically where we know there are a lot of issues. Offloading from a truck to a storage room, something like that. So I think as of today, you need also to understand that it's really not high-tech, right? So typically, it would probably just be some guy signing a piece of paper. Now it's been offloaded here. So could that be improved? Probably quite easily, right? It doesn't need to be blockchain necessarily. It could just be digital. So that's why I also pointed at getting the right data in front of the right people. So this solution design. So could you imagine that this guy will not sign until he sees the temperature reading, and then do it digitally? Then we have it tracked. Simple things like that could improve probably the cold chain.
Okay, that's.
Yeah, so the follow-up was, if you, usually if a product gets spoiled along the way in terms of getting outside this temperature range, do you know if that typically happens in storage or typically happens in these handover periods? Like, is this handover even a problem? Like, do you even see it as a problem?
We have these blank spots. We don't know exactly. We know from what we are informed that it is an issue typically when offloading. For instance, if you do that in warmer countries where many goods come from, it takes a lot of time, and there are issues there in these in-betweens. So the sign-offs are important, but it doesn't mean that there couldn't be issues in all parts of the chain, right?
No, I would say that I think most cases happen in relation to a handover. But I mean, the handover itself, if it's a matter of one crate leaving the truck to get loaded into the other, we're talking a minute maximum, right? And even though if it's a fairly temperature-sensitive product, if you come from ideal temperature of 5 degrees and you're exposed in the sun for even 5 minutes of 40 degrees, it doesn't impact food quality, right? Because it's about the core temperature of the product So it's not the actual handover. I think it's more in relation to the handover. If you have a truck that arrives 10 hours early for the other truck to arrive, and the driver shuts down the engine powering the refrigeration system, this is where you get issues. This is where we've had examples that we've tracked before that cucumbers go bad if they are 10 hours inside a 50-degree truck, not surprisingly.
So it's a question regarding the hardware you already produce and sell. So how much of that is already IoT capable, and like what part of the actual cold chain is, or like stakeholder is the most conservative with adopting this technology and actually the value chain, the cold chain as a whole?
Yeah, excellent question. The last one first, because that's a simple one. Logistic by a landslide. Transportation by a landslide. They're super conservative. And we had previous attempts of providing solutions in this case, and it basically ended because the logistics companies, they wouldn't adopt new processes for whatever reasons, but they were the conservative ones. Perhaps also the ones that have the least at stake at the end of the day. They was very much driven by food retailers. They wanted it because they could see the benefit, but truck drivers, not so much. So I would mark that as the most conservative. Now, with regards to our existing product portfolio, when you say real IoT, are you meaning direct edge to cloud capabilities, or?
Whatever allows you to actually capture the necessary data to power the whole chain.
Yeah. So here we have a sort of a gap in our portfolio today. We do have telemetry devices, but they might be a bit over-engineered, to be honest, for this use case. The way that we monitor and capture data on the supermarket, this is fixed cabled solutions, right? It's not true IoT. It's a gateway that communicates with the internet through a VPN tunnel, so super complex, not something that we would call true IoT. So yes, I would say here we have a product gap. So we don't have a really good portfolio of products to just pull on.
Okay, there are a lot. I don't think we will manage to take all questions here. There's a question here. Have you thought about how the employees in Danfoss will react to the change in management from the traditional mechanical engineering to SaaS offerings? Are they all on board with the change?
Good question. Well, we're in the middle of the change, so yeah, we have not just thought about it, we are also experiencing it at the moment. And I'll give Bjarke the opportunity to answer also from your point of view, Bjarke, but I mean, I'm not seeing a direct pushback, so it's not that people are afraid or trying to avoid it. I think there are just so many questions as to how does it work, and training especially a sales guy to sell subscriptions versus selling 10 big pricey compressors when you're being measured on revenue or top line. That's the main challenge, right? You see, so if I'm a sales guy and I only have 8 hours a day to go and sell stuff, I would rather sell what I'm comfortable with and what I'm measured on. And those are the nice big compressors that I know if I sell 10 of those, I'm going to meet my quota. And if I sell a subscription-based service that I have a hard time explaining, and I hope I don't get questions about connectivity and stuff because I don't know how to explain that, and I'm not really being measured on it, then obviously what would you do as a sales guy? You would sell what you would know, and you would sell what you're being measured on. So that is a very important part of the change that we're also working with, how to measure or how to, let's say, incentivize and how to upskill sales guys to sell cloud solutions on a subscription-based model.
Thank you. About the competitors, there's a question from Simon. Are competing companies such as Amazon looking into cold chain solutions?
Yes.
Okay,
they are.
That was a short question.
And they're ahead of
answer.
us.
Sorry?
and they're ahead of us.
Okay, also good information to get. Then there is a question, have you considered temperature loggers that can be uploaded in the end of the journey, question mark, that might need products profiles to analyze the quality at the end? Do you have any?
Excellent. Yes, we have considered it. Again, somebody went into solution mode. So yeah, I think it's certainly a viable thing. I mean, there are obvious benefits of passive temperature loggers. They're cheap, which means that you can put them into, let's say, smaller crates, so to speak, because you don't have a huge overhead. Obviously, they don't give you any warnings up front because you only get the full transparency of the cold chain once you have physically the temperature logger with you. So the benefits of a real-time or near real-time IoT solution that allows you to track your cucumbers from the time you ordered them, and maybe even say that, oh, I see that they are now over temperature somewhere in southern Germany. I don't even want to get them, I don't even want to receive them in Denmark, I'm just going to decline them. That you cannot do with a temperature logger, as a passive temperature logger. So we have considered it, but obviously it comes with also downsides with regard to the end product that you can offer with a passive temperature logger.
And here is a question, since you don't know which box of goods goes where from production to retailer, does that mean that the barcode you mentioned the boxes have is not scanned along the transport from A to B?
I think typically it is, but we don't know from the very get-go where it ends. So that was the point before. So when it starts, we don't know where it ends, but it is probably being tracked all the way through. Again, it could differ a bit, right, depending on what food product we're talking about.
Are there any existing cold chains where you already work together with and / provided cooling or sensors to all silos? So where it is just the cooperation that is lacking?
It basically happens in, in silos, or it not as a connected end-to-end cold chain, how we're working today, right? So we are working, just to mention an example, we're working together with the Indian government to build up capabilities, basically to build up cold chain infrastructure, but not on the monitoring side, but basically make sure that there are enough refrigerated trucks, there are enough refrigerated storage capacity in order to make sure that food is kept under temperature control throughout the cold chain. But that's the old side of the business. That's just providing our hardware and helping legislators and high-level decision makers understand the investment that needs to be done, and that includes which refrigerants to use, etc. So pretty heavy on the, let's say, thermodynamics side, not end-to-end connectivity.
Okay, we have a few minutes left. The general, I think I'm going to rephrase this. It's about the threshold. So do all players along the value chain agree on the best temperature and transportation time that the products is allowed to have?
Not sure about the transportation time, but at least the thresholds.
Okay.
I believe that should be clear.
I think it's fairly predefined, as standard predefined that specific products are supposed to be within specific thresholds. But as I mentioned earlier, I think at the end of the day, if you're the buyer, if you're the supermarket and you have a different idea, you just follow that pretty much.
There's a question, are goods transported in reused containers / pallets?
In most cases, yes. The standard is, at least that I'm aware of in Europe, is that you use pallets, and depending a little bit, I mean, take milk, for example. Milk leaves the dairy production in complete products. It's not being repackaged or anything. So that just leaves in crates, standard reusable crates. Same thing for meat in some cases, but then also if you have a butcher in the supermarket, you receive bigger chunks of meat. So depends on the product, I would say.
Yeah, there's a question from the auditorium. We'll go with that first.
So you mentioned the thing about you have like an hour, and where if you don't notify them, then you could be liable for spoilage. Do you go like backwards with that to Microsoft and their cloud services? So like, let's say for some reason your services would shut down for 3-4 hours, and then that affects a whole range of supermarkets, and then suddenly you're liable for millions.
Yeah.
What do you do in that case?
Well, in that case, we also have a service level agreement with Microsoft, right? So if their databases, for example, crash and are not recovered, then they're also liable for us. But that's one of the benefits of choosing to go with Microsoft from our point of view, because they have 99.995 or so percent uptime, which basically means that they never crash. And if they do, they have disaster recovery. But in principle, yes, you're right. The services, which includes the alarms that we built on Microsoft infrastructure, we can go back, and Microsoft are liable on the service level for us. So we can pass on the bill, so to speak.
Okay, then we take a few more here. Is Danfoss' key goal really to keep the food safe, as the challenge says, or do they actually have an interest in how to make money based on the current cold chain issues?
It's good. Well, but I think hopefully those are quite intertwined, quite connected. If we don't manage to provide good services, then it's hard to make business.
Yeah.
But if you're asking whether we are a commercial business, then yes, obviously it is, right? So that's important. But as we also pointed out in the beginning, I mean, the core mission of Danfoss has always been about energy efficiency and sustainability, actually, because it's just part of the DNA. So it's not like there is any conflict there. It's yeah.
Yeah, of course we need to make money, right? And if we didn't make money, Bjarke and I would maybe be teaching this kind of stuff somewhere else, or doing something else, right? We need to make money as a business, which also means that when we're talking about connected cold chain, of course we need to look into the commercial aspect of it. So we wouldn't do it if we couldn't see a way of making money either directly or through upsell of other products. But there's a commercial model that needs to work, obviously.
Yeah.
Yes, it is a question related to your competitor, because you said before that you consider them to be ahead on the cold chain solution, but also that what you want to sell is a service-based method for the whole cold chain. Which do you then consider the threat that Amazon do the same, and maybe that prevents you from selling your existing cooling solutions because they have kind of locked the market into their own ecosystem?
I don't think that Amazon as such is locking the markets into their own ecosystem, as far as I understand. When I say that Amazon is ahead, it means that they have already created some partnerships with different stakeholders, and they have invested in infrastructure and products, and they've made acquisitions of passive sensor technology and so on that we don't have at the moment. With that being said, there are also non-profit type partnerships, or Bjarke, you mentioned Food Trust as one of them, which is basically driven out of IBM, so comes from the technology side. Yeah, I don't really know exactly how to answer your question, right? I don't think Amazon is locking people in necessarily, but they're ahead on so many other aspects, and they're definitely building, so they're building their own cold chain, but also the fact that they have started partnerships. They also recognize, similar to what we introduced, that it's not something that you can just build a proprietary cold chain solution and solve it yourself. So you're dependent on these type of partnerships.
And we are relying on, open protocols, right? So it's not like, we are open to collaborate with others as well. But of course, there's this element, if Amazon, for instance, take the whole cold chain on some parts, some regions, some products, then why would the stakeholders in that cold chain then consider Danfoss for services, right? So yes, obviously there's this part, right? Why would you have more platforms unless there's some added value? And will others venture into this cold chain market? They're already doing, right? So if we don't do anything, then of course we miss out. But in terms of risk and so on, we don't know, right, exactly what that will mean to our service business, whether customers are locked in or not. But we just recognize this opportunity at least. So that's the main point, I think.
There's another question.
We have a few questions here, and there's one here. So while Catherine is walking to the next student.
Have you considered any priority marketplace, like you wanna go with Europe or like India, China, because those markets who are hard to crack, they do have some companies. They, like for example, in dairy market in India, they have one local company called Amul. They have like only 14% of market share, but it is quite big. And the second comes at the Nestle, but they have tried to create this supply chain for the milk so that they can get fast, don't get wasted, and even though they are from 60s or somewhere, but still they have tried to manage just like 6 or 5% of market share. So which market do you go first? Like go for the competitive market with Europe and already they have competition, or you want to go somewhere else?
I think we would rather keep that open for you to come up with in the challenge, right? Because there are benefits of going maybe with a market like India, where there are huge focus on investing in a brand new cold chain. So it's maybe more of a greenfield scenario in some cases, and now there's the opportunity to also pass legislation on monitoring. So that would be a pro of going with a developing market. But yeah, that's essentially I would like you to elaborate on when selecting markets.
There is one follow-up. Do you already, like, there are many, like in India as well, like government is focusing on many aspects where government is focusing on many aspects, like where food don't get wastage and priority infrastructure. So does the Danfoss already have like a structured partnership with Indian government or something like that? Because for Danish companies, they have already, like for many green environmental companies, like let's say there was one battery company, they already like tried to go with a government and make a partnership with government. Yeah. So do you prefer to go with that direction, or do you have it already or not?
We have I mean, big part of our early stage sales activities, you can say, is relations with governments, right? Because we are also trying to impact legislation within environmental and energy efficiency and so on, because of the sole fact that the products, the main parts of the products that we produce do help solve some of the climate issues that are hot topics. So we have in India, we have in many regions of the world already connections, or I wouldn't say partnerships, right? Because you don't have a commercial partner, a commercial business, a partnership with the government, but we do have, opportunity to speak to certain decision makers in the legislative process. Yeah, and that's an important part. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought your service solutions, are they compatible with the competitors' products like Emerson's hardware?
Yes, to some extent they are. So the existing services that we have are actually compatible with one product family from Emerson, but not compatible with the whole market. But the approach that we're taking is that we want to be an open platform. We don't want to be, we want to be hardware agnostic, and we don't want to create a proprietary platform that locks people into buy Danfoss forever. We believe, and that's the strategy that we've chosen, that in the long run, it's better business for us to be open and therefore be hardware agnostic. But currently, we're only supporting one of quite a few. So that's, I would say, an ongoing work stream to improve that.
Thank you so much for all your very, very great answers to all these fantastic questions from both you here in the auditorium and those on the chat. So could you please give Thomas and Bjarke a big hand?
Thank you.
Thanks for taking your time to be here today. There will be an opportunity to meet you again in 2 weeks' time, but that will be online. But today, the task is to work in your groups and start working on the challenge. So what have you heard? Katrin gave you some clues in the beginning to take these basic models that you worked with, the value proposition canvas, the business model canvas, the STAR model, and the key theories from the contemporary management book. Try to map what have you actually heard. You can listen to the presentation again. We've uploaded the slides. Try to find out what is this case really about, what challenges do you see, which one would you like to work with, and then go on from there. So you also have the chance to meet with your teaching assistants and sign up for meetings with them. So that is the task for today. So thanks for coming, and have a really good afternoon to you in the room, and also to you, those of you who are watching.
Mange gode spørgsmål. Ja.